think that's right. Are we? Hope that's right. Hope we're good. Hopefully the volume is correct. Seems like it might be a little low. Maybe that's better. Good evening. It is February 22nd, 2023. This is attempt number 2 at episode 90 of Beyond the Double Red Doors. There's a helicopter flying overhead as if on cue. Hope everybody's doing well. I apologize for last week. I suddenly felt unwell, and actually it wasn't that sudden, but I was trying to power through it, and ultimately I could not. But I feel better. I was coming to you from just outside DC. This morning I was in New York City, where it seems I'll be spending quite a bit of time, probably, in the near future, on the Upper West Side, as it's called, once you get past Harlem to Washington Heights. Really fascinating area. Enjoyed the time there. People who, obviously there are people who say, you get the best pizza in the world in New York City, right? And there are people who say, Chicago, and there are people who say it's all bullshit, right? Like, get good pizza pretty much anywhere. And I do think that it's true that you can find a really good pizza place pretty much anywhere. But your odds of sort of throwing a dart blindfolded at a pizza place in New York City and hitting a good one are a lot higher. Excuse me. So yeah, I'm hopefully not coming down with a cold, but maybe possibly coming down with a cold. Did I overdo it with the blue and gold here? Maybe I did. I don't know if I did. Even my hanky is blue. And the LUT is giving all the blues this grayness that I really actually love. Gonna have to do something about that in the very near future. Having definite sound, it's power issues with this mix pre-device that I'm using for you all to hear me. I guess that's the heat on right now. It's really annoying though, because this is supposed to be like a, quality field recorder here. Its power supply should be really robust. And it's basically Zoom level is what I feel like I'm dealing with here. I'm going back to dealing with the Zoom. Sounds a lot better than a Zoom. I just rolled over my headphone cord. Nothing's going right. So far, everything's going wrong. I'm on the gimbal here on the main camera. So I've got the 3 cameras tonight, right? And there's really no reason for me to use them. But the main camera tonight is on a gimbal. The old LiDAR should be maintaining focus on me. What does it do if I put Mr. Machine? It grabs him. It grabbed Mr. Machine. Now, if y'all don't remember Mr. Machine, that means you're under the age of 45, I guess. barely works. Come on, Mr. Machine. You can do it. There you go. There you go. It really is the little inflatable piece that's supposed to give resistance that now I think doesn't really give the resistance it once did. This is a toy when I was like a little kid. I found it in a thrift shop. And it actually works. More or less works. But it's also kind of creepy. Right? This could be kind of a creepy thing to have. It starts going off in the middle of the night. Like this is, a horror story, right? The kid has this toy, and in the middle of the night it just starts walking and making that weird noise that it makes. Let's get a real. Can we get it? Where are we? Wait. You. Actually, that's not much closer, is it? All kinds of. I was so fascinated with this as a kid. It's really just gears. Still. Anyway, my live sound recorder is giving sound about as well as Mr. Machine works. Yeah, it's scary. It's scary. Warning, I'm hitting my mic in a way that is making me sound far away at times. Well, I'm not sure. I don't know what to do about that. Hopefully it's not doing it on the regular. But anyway, okay. So, what did I want to talk about tonight? What I wanted to talk about, a couple things. I reread, well, I didn't reread, but I re-listened to a literary criticism of Raymond Carver, who, for those of you who don't know, again, if you know Mr. Machine, if you're born and raised in the U.S. in the 80s, if you know Mr. Machine, you probably know who Raymond Carver is. He's a short story writer. Very, very American in his style and his kind of Hemingway-ish, Cormac McCarthy light, I suppose. Like if Cormac McCarthy lost half his vocabulary. No. That's not fair. If Cormac McCarthy chose to use only half of his vocabulary, and could not keep a story going for more than, say, a dozen pages or so, that's even not right. It's like Hemingway meets Cormac McCarthy meets Slice of Life meets Carol O'Connor. Who else can I throw in there? E.E. Cummings. A little bit of Twainian wit, maybe. Wasn't that funny? But anyway, so I was listening to a literary criticism of Raymond Carver, who I have not read Raymond Carver in a long time. His body of work was not that large and pretty quick, easy to get through. I remember when I did read it, it affected me quite a bit, not so much because of the stories themselves, but because of just the style, the way he wrote, right? I felt like, and I was glad that this was, I have a problem, right? Like I will go see a movie, and then after the movie, I'll be like, well, I think I liked that movie. I'm not sure yet if I liked that movie. Give me a day to think about it. And I also want to read about it. And I will decide. This is not all movies. Like some movies, obviously, you instantly dislike. Saw one of the worst movies in a long time from a surprising source. David Cronenberg's son, Infinity Pool. horrible, horrible movie. Made me want to. I don't know what Alexander Skarsgård was thinking. I don't know what anyone in that movie was thinking. Like, it was horribly written. Mia Goth, like, what was she thinking? Like, she's on top of the world right now. She could take any script she wanted. She read Infinity Pool. She read that script and she was like, yeah, this is going to do it. You know what? A movie about an island. The premise was promising enough. The start of it was promising enough. So this is an example of a movie I saw and I knew I didn't like it. I knew I didn't like it halfway through. Up until about halfway through, I was like, maybe this could still go in an interesting direction. Maybe. Perhaps. And then I was slowly losing hope as it went on. The final nail in the coffin was a sort of Yothamos orgy scene that was, I don't know, put into for a little bit of edge. I think it's Brandon Cronenberg, I think is the Nepo baby's name. Brandon Cronenberg trying to earn the approbation of his father, maybe? I don't know, there was body horror in it, right? But the premise was you go to this island and, it's absolutely ludicrous. There's this third world island that you can go to, and if you commit, first of all, almost any crime is punishable by death, but they've got a little way around it. If you allow them to make a clone of you, they will kill the clone instead, and technically they fulfilled the letter of the law by killing this clone, and you still are there to live, I suppose. But you have to watch your clone get killed. And it's very sort of Hammurabi sort of code of ethics there. That if the person who killed you's or you killed's offspring are alive, they are the ones that can kill you. If not, the state can stand in as a proxy. This amazing technology developed for this very niche purpose. And you can imagine the sort of hijinks that ensue as a result when you have... I thought it was going in the direction of like Soma. I thought it was going into this direction of like, all right, these people have no idea. And they mentioned this briefly. You have no idea if you're a clone or not. Like maybe there's no way to know if they kill the clone or if they kill the original. It would be like, for them to have such an elaborate operation, it makes sense that they would be killing originals and creating clones that are somehow, secretly aligned to whatever their nefarious purpose might be. So that was the basic premise, and up until that point, I was kind of still going along with it, still thinking maybe this could be good. But then it just starts going in just a ridiculous sort of... it was trying to be abstract and expressionist, but it ended up really just kind of being silly, in my opinion. My humble opinion, which I will not be swayed from. But there are times when I go to a movie and I literally am not sure what I thought. Banshees of Inisherin, I did not know. I walked out of that movie kind of in a state of... ambivalence isn't quite the word, but it's close. I was just kind of... half of me was going, I think that was good, and the other half was going, man, Bruges was so good, and this was not. But that one scene with Barry Keoghan, what scene are you talking about? That scene with Barry Keoghan, this one?
There goes that dream.
That little lip at the bottom that goes down like his tongue kind of resting on his lip, but you don't see his tongue. had that scene in it. How can a movie with that scene in it be a movie that I didn't like? I think on further reflection, I'm firmly in the I didn't like that movie camp. But I still like Barry's performance. It's fine. That's an example of a movie where I was torn. So I've been torn on Raymond Carver in the past as well, too. And reread him a couple times. Like I said, like there's not really that much, right? The reason I think he made such an impact, it was a time when literary magazines were big, right? So there was a magazine called Playboy back in the day. Showed naked pictures. Women, they'd play girls too. But they would put like short stories in Playboy. This is massively circulated publication. Short stories as an art form kind of had a renaissance in the 80s. And I don't know, I would have to look into this a lot more, but I don't know if Raymond Carver capitalized on that or had something to do with that. It's hard to judge. There are people who say both. People who say that Gordon Leach was the person behind getting all of these short story writers to write a bunch of short stories and have them published. And a lot of them were kind of slice of America kind of short stories. Don DeLillo. Who else was good from that period? That's about it. I'm not super well versed in short stories of the late 70s, early 80s. But anyway, one of the stories that he wrote was called What We Talk About When We Talk About Love. And one of the things I really appreciated about Raymond Carver, and this was the thing that I was glad to hear sort of reaffirmed by this analysis, was that he actually wasn't really at his best when you were looking at individual stories published, say, in a magazine, right? He was at his best when you read a book of his short stories, because his stories often kind of thematically flowed into one another. Although the characters often, a lot of times his characters were not named. He didn't use a lot of description. It was a lot of, he goes, she goes, he goes, she goes, they go, that kind of thing. But best appreciated, in my opinion, when you're reading them in a bunch and when you're reading them in a way that were actually architected to be read. And I think the way they were architected to be read is the order that they appear in What We Talk About When We Talk About Love and Cathedral and the other two. Will you please be quiet? I think so. So I found that fascinating, right? That sort of the idea of a meta story fascinating. And it wasn't like he was creating a universe, right? But he was creating a sort of a way for you to kind of dance through the ideas of his stories. And then he'd hit you with something different. And then he'd lull you back with a couple of stories that are like, okay, this is familiar. And then he'd hit you with something different. And I found that to be delightful and surprising, and something that I've noticed in modern day short story writers, particularly, I'd say maybe, I guess Brian Evenson and maybe John Langan. Like I'm very biased in like the genre of books that I enjoy. I mean, obviously, like Lovecraft did this too, right? Like that was Edgar Allan Poe did this like crazy, right? I think if you randomly grabbed a Raymond Carver story and took it out of its in situ location, you'd be quite likely, it'd be a coin flip whether like that you read that short story and were like, well, this is a waste of my time or not. However, if you read that same story in the context of the stories it was sandwiched between, you might have a different opinion. I don't really think you need, for Lovecraft, it's nice to have the lore. But a lot of that lore is kind of like post hoc lore. So I don't know that you need it. For Edgar Allan Poe, you didn't need it at all. For Shirley Jackson, you didn't need it at all. But for some people, whatever, it's fine. That's a fine way of writing. You could, if somebody is deliberately creating like these start and finish points and saying this is a story, and yet the only reason this story exists is to provide a beat between these other two stories, that story's not meant to be read out of its context, regardless of it, if it's called a short story and has a name and has a page number you can go to and read it. The point is, it's kind of like, album rock versus singles, right? You pick any one song off Sgt. Pepper's, with the exception of like A Day in the Life, a couple others. Not all that, come on. Being for the benefit of Mr. Kite, I don't care what people say about that bass line. That song serves a purpose in its place. You take it out of its place, it doesn't really serve that much of a purpose. But I think that's valid. I think that's a valid way to go about creating. I mean, there's no invalid way to create art, right? But I enjoyed having that part of what I thought about him and what I enjoyed about him and what I felt like maybe didn't come across in his writing. I found being validated by this literary critic was good for me. Made me feel like I made the right choice. I'm not a Carver fanatic, but I do think the short story, what we talk about when we talk about love, is a great short story. Primarily because, well, there's a few reasons, right? But one reason is he will often have a story start with a framing device of telling a story. So he'll have, in this story, there are people sitting around or at a dinner table or whatever it is, and one of them is telling a story. And that is the framing device for the story. So you could say, like, in the story, nothing happens but people talking, but there's no difference if you say, if I'm reading a story that is somebody telling me about a story that happened, this is the sort of inception-y nature of the title of what I wanted to ramble about this week. What we talk about when we talk about love. So whether I'm reading a story wherein that story has people sitting around doing nothing but telling a story, or whether I'm reading a story wherein it is the story that they told, it's just one level of abstraction away. Right? And there are things that having that level of abstraction can give you, tools that can give you, that let you tell a better story. Or, if used improperly, obviously, to tell a worse story. So, what we talk about when we talk about love is a group of, I think it's 3 couples. Maybe it's 2 couples. Might just be 4 people. Either 2 couples or 3 couples. Shit. I should remember that. I don't. I didn't look it up prior to this. But they're doing, they're doing what seemed to be like a, here's another thing I like about Raymond Carver. He romanticizes the idea of what I experienced in my childhood. So it's personal for me, right? It isn't necessarily something that I think would be universal. The idea of middle class to upper middle class people having dinner parties, right? Like, that's not going to resonate with a lot of people. It's certainly not going to resonate, generally not going to resonate like with younger people, right? For me, it did. Right? So that's a part of my life that I recall very fondly and remember feeling very sort of safe, and have taken a stab myself at, trying to get some sort of experiential art out of it, still in the working stages. But the idea of falling asleep to the sounds of your parents having a dinner party is it's bourgeois. It's bourgeois as hell, but it's also quite calming. It's calming to me. But a lot of his stories took place in that world, and a lot of his stories are definitely like of a time, and they're full of misogyny, and they're full of, the terrible, the ways that people used to treat people, 50, 60 years ago. Probably because that was his experience. I don't know anything. I don't know. Maybe he probably should have read up to make sure. I don't think that he was accused of anything particularly vile during his life, but I could be wrong. Well, there you go, right? Like, experiential. He was an alcoholic. Died quite young, right? And this is what I'm talking about, right? Doesn't resonate with everyone, right? So I don't know. I enjoy stories that don't resonate with me also. Depends on the story. For better or for worse, Raymond Carver was popularized, no doubt because of his particular shade of skin color and his gender, and because he wrote for people like that as well. I fully admit that. I don't need to admit it. I don't know why I'm apologizing for Raymond Carver. Okay, Amy, this sounds kind of indignant. I'm not sure for finally reading your comments. I haven't read anyone's comments. But yeah, I mean, he was an alcoholic, so probably found. I'm kind of like, I don't really like the idea of write what you know. I don't really think like you need to do that. I think like some of the best stuff I've written is I've read is obviously written by people who didn't know what they were writing about, or couldn't claim to have firsthand experience with what they were writing about. If for no other reason than it would be impossible. But then I guess if it's impossible for everybody, then no one's better poised to write about it than anyone else. So maybe that's it. Maybe that's the difference there. I don't really know. Let's see, Amy. I don't know. I don't know what to say about this. Right? Like, I don't know. They're not super exciting. Like, nothing really huge happens in them. I find that the way that he writes like leaves a lot of space for you, for the idea of productive consumption, which I know I talk about a lot, and it's annoying as hell to hear somebody talk about this all the time. And I know it's not my idea or even close to my idea. Right? There's thousands and thousands of people in the past who have come up with terms for productively consuming something. Right? But I find that he is a good person if you resonate with him, right, to practice productive consumption on. I'll give you an example. Don't remember the name of the story. I don't remember the name of the story, but there is a story wherein, to your point, Amy, a drunk person is having a yard sale. A couple comes to look at whatever is at the yard sale, right? The drunk person who's running the yard sale is not there right at that moment, kind of left, then comes back. When they come back, the couple has found a bed that they like and a TV they like. The man comes back. A lot of his stories take a nefarious turn, right? And that's probably another reason I like them, right? It'll be like Americana, slice of fucking the Coppertone baby with the, oh man, that ad is problematic, isn't it? Do you remember the Coppertone ad? It's a little girl in a bikini and a dog is pulling her bikini down and you can see her rear end, and it's I guess the idea is to show you the difference in tan between her back and what her bikini was covering. And it's oh man, there's I gotta look this up now. This is totally out of nowhere for me. Let's see, because I think this could be, yeah, this is troubling. This is super troubling, man. This is what I saw everywhere when I was a kid. My God. Look at this. And maybe some of you know this ad. I remember it because it was ubiquitous. It was freaking everywhere. But that's problematic. For so, look at, she has a sexualized expression on her face. And she has really long legs compared to, let's go from the belt up, looks very young and infantilized. But then from the belt down, looks much older. And yes, it's a dog, right? Innocent and funny, haha. But no, this is a problem. Shit. Yeah, hopefully that's not being used by Coppertone. I'm sure it's not being used by Coppertone anymore. But it's not even talk about the dog itself. Right? There's so many reasons. Anyway, so he'll write stories. Carver will write stories wherein everything is just kind of fine and lovely and nothing untoward seems to be going on. And then in the end, something in the last paragraph or in the last sentence even, something terrible will happen or something, it'll hint towards something terrible. There's a short story in what we talk about when we talk about love called The Bath that I think is pretty effective at doing that. And yeah, I am predisposed to that kind of story. I'm predisposed to good twists or twists that take me unawares. I like Inside Number 9. I liked The Sixth Sense. But that was not the point of me talking about this story. The point was for me to illustrate what I think is the negative space that Carver can leave the reader in which to practice productive consumption. So in my opinion, the way that I experience Carver when I read him, your creative writing perspective, undergrad guys can be in every seminar. Well, yeah. So I mean, there's Just like I might be predisposed to like him. No, what just changed here that I can't do this? That might be a reason that you are predisposed not to like him. That doesn't sound great. Like you can't shove somebody down people's throats, right? I could see, wanting to expose people to a broad range of authors, but not a broad range of author. Anyway, if I could get back to where I'm trying to talk about, like the idea of negative space, right? So some authors will fill up all the space and will leave nothing to your imagination. And some authors will do the opposite, right? So you'll have your Hemingways on one end and you'll have fucking Melville on the other, right? And I'm not casting aspersions at either one of those styles. I think they both, personally, I prefer somewhere in the middle. But they both have their place. But Carver is very much more on the Hemingway side of that spectrum. Whatever you want to call it. And in this story where the couple is having the drunk man is having the yard sale. And the couple comes to take a look at something and likes the TV and likes the bed. The man comes back and he's clearly like leering at the woman. And I say clearly, but like there's very few words used to, like it's almost like here's another sort of point, like the idea of themes. Like Carver is so full of seedy men that is the baseline assumption when you go into a Carver story, and you may or may not sort of ascribe those characteristics to this person simply because it's a Raymond Carver story, right? You may do that, and you're usually going to be right. Anyway, there's definitely a point here. An idea of this space, like where he creates the space, is in that story. I want to get this right. He ends up, there's also a stereo and a turntable. He ends up putting a song on the turntable. And the text says something like, the man thinks, "Why don't you two kids dance?" In fact, the name of the book, of the story, I believe, is called "Why Don't You Dance?" But the text is, and again, I'm trying to make sure I think it is, "Why don't you?" The man thinks, "Why don't you two kids dance?" He then says, "Why don't you dance?" And I feel like it's very funny. No shit. I feel like there's an area where you can put lots of productive consumption to work. Right? Like, why did the character in the story think, I'm going to say, "Why don't you kids dance?" and instead say, "Why don't you dance?" And if you've read other Carver stories, like, you have a lot of reasons right at hand why you think that person would have chosen to omit the word kids. But even if you haven't, like, if you're paying attention and you're apt to sort of like pick up on those kinds of things, maybe you might read it and it would come to you as well. And you go, "Oh, that's interesting. Why didn't he say what he thought? Instead, he said this other thing." Clearly they're kids. Clearly he thinks they're kids. But he doesn't want them to think that he thinks of them as kids. Why? I think the question is obliquely answered in a sort of postscript in that story. But that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about when I'm talking about this negative space. And I mean, you can do that with almost every author, right? And the negative space doesn't have to have anything to do. I mean, that's a case where it has something directly to do with the story, right? Plenty of cases where an author can write something that makes you think about something completely different. It has nothing to do with the story itself, but it makes you think about, your life or something along those lines. That it stirs something in you, and that's where you turn your focus. But it's outside the lines. Either way, it's outside the lines. I'm sure a lot of people, when they read, write in the margins. Of course, the book that's sitting here, I have not written in the margins at all. I tend to do that. This is a book, I should have done that. I think I have this on audiobook, and maybe that's why it only has like a couple of marks in it. This is another Eugene Thacker book, by the way. I think there's Jay-Z wore a jacket that says on the back, it says "In the dust of this planet." It's the cover of this book on the back of the jacket. And Eugene Thacker made a joke about it possibly being in the only book in history where people are infinitely more familiar with the cover than the contents, or the title than the contents. I disagree. I think 1984 probably takes the cake on that one. There's probably others too. Relatively modern fiction. Anyway, so, oh, Amy, you posted a link to it. Ooh, well, I'd like to thank you for doing that, even though you hate him. Let's see. But part of the problem here is I don't feel like this is one of those stories that I feel like it's difficult to judge in a vacuum. This is the last story in the collection, I think. Or almost the last story. I think I'm hearing what you're saying, Nasha, when you say, sounds like my voice is going in and out. Maybe that polar pattern will be a little more encompassing. Perfect. A PDF. Is this public domain even? I can finally figure out if there are two couples or three. Yeah, I mean, like, if you don't like stories about the rich English, you're not going to like P.G. Wodehouse. Or if you can't overcome that aversion, right? Which, when I was younger, I didn't have a problem with it. As I got older, I started to have a little more of a problem with it. But I do still love P.G. Wodehouse. I need to get a drink. A Coke? I don't have my Coke. Let me grab a Coke, and I'm going to come right back. I got to read what y'all are saying. I have not been doing that. But I will in just 1 minute. What should I put on here? I have something I don't want to torture people. I'm just going to put on the standby. I'll be right back. Okay, sorry. Nope. This is like putting a USB cable in. Ooh. Got a notification. The Webb telescope spots 6 galaxies that should not exist. Does this mean it's further out than it should be? Galaxies dating back as far as 500 million years after the Big Bang have been discovered with tens or hundreds of billions of stars. They're not supposed to be that big. It's bananas. It's bananas, said Erica Nelson, an assistant professor of astrophysics at the University of Colorado, co-author of the paper, in a statement that accompanied the release. You just don't expect the early universe to be able to organize itself that quickly. These galaxies should not have had time to form. Learn something new every day. Let's do you. You. No? Let's do you. Do you. Cheers. You can see the growing out effects of cutting one's own hair in this particular view, especially with the rim light highlighting it. Oh boy. Until those suckers lie down of their own accord. It's not going to be pretty. Oh, why don't I run? Hey, here's an idea also. All kinds of fun stuff today. Running the macro. All right, let me see what people have been saying. Too much. Stacy, good evening. Pivy. Talk is cheap. Time for action. Action is always meant for the next generation. It's never meant for you. It's always meant for the ones that come after. Unless you're Marjorie Taylor Greene. Oh my God, this is so cheesy. What's happening here is so cheesy. I'm sorry. Marjorie Taylor Greene, by the way, was calling for another civil war. People were very reactionary about it. I disagree with everything that she says. I do wonder if we're beyond saving as a union from time to time. Oh man, Amy, you were talking smack about Carver before. Oh, that's right, Stacy, you're in Scotland. Geez, Africa, US, you're all over the place. That must be nice. Hey, Lexi, good to see you. Oh, see, I didn't see this stuff, Amy. I mean, you're not wrong. You are wrong. But in essence, you're not wrong. Right? Like the majority of Carver stories, the protagonist, if you can call them a protagonist, he's often quite critical of those people. I think can lambast the very people he's sort of elevating. But by my estimation, about 1 in every 6 stories is from the point of view of a woman being abused by a man, usually. So there's some variation. I mean, it's kind of... it could be seen as an artifact of the idea of this idyllic American life that existed in that time period, maybe not being quite so idyllic. Something nefarious under the surface. Oh man, wow. No ire being with. I can't take this. Sorry, I thought this macro would be a good idea. It's annoying the hell out of me. Let's just go back. Go back to this. Okay, well, but I mean, I want to talk about what I want to talk about. That's literally, I'm not going to not talk about something because it upsets somebody. Oh, Miz, it's been a minute. So I've been rewatching What We Do in the Shadows occasionally, and that's all I can do is every time Jeff comes on, I think of Jeff, Jesk, Jeffsk, Jeffsk. Oh, Lexi, yeah, that's very sweet. Was something that it's just like a simple thing that I'm trying to finish. It has like a actual song. Don't worry, I'm not gonna pull out a guitar. But I find the way that I tend to record that stuff is I record a preponderance. I go overboard. I record, 4 or 5 guitars, all of them doing a bunch of stuff. Then I listen to it over and over again, and then I just start subtracting. So what you were hearing there was prior to any subtraction. And then maybe like some melodic ideas will come to me, either intentional or sometimes they're just accidental as a result of playing a bunch of bullshit on top of another bunch of bullshit, or improvising something on top of something, and it sticks out to you, and you think, oh, I'll take this and I'll make this into something. So you might develop a motif that way. It's kind of putting pearls on a pig to say that about this particular thing, but I was doing bills just before starting. Oh, hey, Maddie. You're probably gone by now, but what else do we got? KJ. How are you doing, KJ? Maddie, do you live in New York? I didn't know that. I probably knew that. I probably knew it. But how could I probably know something? You probably said it, and somewhere I probably knew it, but I forgot it. Yeah. I mean, it's as far north as you can go without being in the Bronx, pretty much. Excuse me. Wow, this is really far back. Okay, I gotta get down. Amy, you still have a Mr. Machine. It's like this. I got this one at a thrift store in the Bronx. And like I said, it doesn't really work, but I just figured I could use it. There's got to be a way I can use this for something. Behaving as if I still make videos with any kind of regularity. I'm so sorry. I apologize for bringing... Well, Mr. Machine really resonated with people, huh? Yeah, and the hat, it's just very. Oh, that's another movie I've watched comparatively recently. It sort of reminds me of this Terrifier 2. It's supposed to be like this horrifying gore fest. I thought it was such a fucking snooze. And I was thinking about like going into it, I was like, ooh, maybe I could get the mask of this guy, and like do videos of him or something. I don't want to be anywhere near that property. That property is garbage. Excuse me. Hi, Green Mile. Hi, Trouser Mouse. Yes, Nasha, that's the danger. Because I felt like it. Because I recently read or listened to on a car ride a literary criticism of Carver. And like him or not, he is a significant figure in American short fiction. Thank you, Trouser Mouse. Yeah, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about, Lexi. That's happened to me before. Like especially if there's like not a chord. Like if it's, I really think a movie was trying to say something, and I try, I think, so hard to get that to be the way that it is, that I completely distort, and I'm totally, as some of you may or may not know, right? Totally pro death of the author, and whatever people make of art is what they make of it. And it's not the author's place or in their power to come in and say, well, that's not what it was supposed to be, so you can't think that, right? Or that's not a valid interpretation of this work. And I know because I created it, right? I think that's bullshit. But I do think like sometimes, especially if it's somebody that I either hate or really, really like and respect, I will try and sort of bend the narrative into something that is either terrible or interesting, so that I can walk out of a movie made by or read a book by somebody who I like, and I can come out of it saying, well, I think what they were trying to say was this, and that has some meaning and relevance, and therefore I like it. It's a pretty horrible way to go through life, though. See, I love hate watching. I don't think Infinity Pool is even worth hate watching. Like, it doesn't inspire that kind of vitriol. It is the blandest of the bland. It is. It's not even vanilla. It's milk left out in the sun just before the point of spoiling. Stacy, what confused you about The Phantom Thread? So that's a movie I really enjoyed. Yes, there's been a lot of clone sci-fi. Hey, Warp Raven. Have you read a Stephen King biography and were stunned by how badly written it was? How many Stephen King biographies are there? I like Stephen King. I don't make any apologies for liking Stephen King. I don't know what the confusion is. People are confused. Fucking salty chat. Oh, this is not fair, Pivy, because I want to read it. That's not fair. Sorry about this sort of lull here as I read what everybody's saying. Night Raven. Hey, Alan. Yeah, so this Coppertone ad was pretty fucking... I know that thing was active not that long ago. Okay, let's see. All right, I want to let me get to the bottom here. Yes, I remember the website. Ask Jeeves, and I remember, of course, obviously, Jeeves and Worcester. Gregor made it. Okay, I gotta just skip down to the bottom here. Yeah, I actually really like Stephen King on writing. It has nothing to do with his life. So my interpretation of it, which could anybody's interpretation can be whatever they want. It was originally for control, done without his knowledge. And then it was a dance that he willingly entered into. At the end, he enjoyed being infirm and having her care for him. So he willingly ingested the poison. There was another movie right around that time that also dealt with poison mushroom. Oh, we've also lived in the Shirley Jackson short story was made into a movie, a Netflix movie, I think right around the same time. But I think there was another one too. Poison mushroom movies were all the rage in 2019. But that was my interpretation of it. So, yeah, so people aren't gonna, you can hang around for this or not. I'm gonna do it. I appreciate, Amy, that you posted this, but I would like to talk about what we talk about when we talk about love, precisely because, not just because, at least I don't think it's because I'm particularly partial to Carver. There's a recency bias here. Like I said, I've just recently read some literary critique of him. And I had reread What We Talk About When We Talk About Love. And I thought that it had an interesting way of making you think of the different ways in which we think about love from the perspective of these rather sort of anachronistic, stereotypical middle class, middle/upper class. I think one of them's a doctor, right? Couples. So what we talk about when we talk about love? All right. Is this illegal for me to do? I don't know. It's relatively short, so we should get through it pretty quick. But obviously, yeah, if you don't want to hear it, it was good seeing you. I'll talk to you another time. Where's the best camera for this? I guess it's this one. Oh, I don't like the shadow. What the fuck? That should not be right. That should not be able to cast that kind of a shadow. Okay, let's go with this camera. I can almost look into the camera. My friend Mel McGinnis. I'm going to give commentary. Here's what I'll do. Check this out. I'm going to give commentary. As I do, this has got to be uncut. If I'm giving commentary, I'll go back to this camera, give commentary. And then, no. Yeah. So here, commentary. Here, reading. My friend Mel McGinnis was talking. Mel McGinnis is a cardiologist, and sometimes that gives him the right. I mean, so right off the bat, right? So if someone's a cardiologist, they have the right to talk, I suppose. The four of us were sitting around his kitchen table drinking gin. Sunlight. There you go. There you go. Amy. They were drinking. Almost always drinking in every story. Sunlight filled the kitchen from the big window behind the sink. There were Mel and me and his second wife, Teresa. Terry, we called her. And my wife, Laura. We lived in Albuquerque then. But we were all from somewhere else. Okay, so it's just the four of them. For some reason, I thought there might have been 6. There was an ice bucket on the table. The gin and the tonic water kept going around. And we somehow got on the subject of love. Mel thought that real love was nothing less than spiritual love. He said he'd spent 5 years in a seminary before quitting to go to medical school. Oh. Just like the Australian guy in House. Chase, just like Chase from House MD. Seminary first, then medical school. Seemingly like in opposition to each other, in a way, right? But shit happens. He said he still looked back on those years in the seminary as the most important years in his life. Terry said the man... Okay, so let's just be clear. So there's Mel, who is the cardiologist, right? His second wife is there, Terry, right? Laura, and the person who is married to the person who is doing the narrator. Knew there was a word for that. Terry said the man she lived with before she lived with Mel loved her so much he tried to kill her. Then Terry said, he beat me up one night. He dragged me around the living room by my ankles. He kept saying, I love you, you bitch. He went on dragging me around the living room. My head kept knocking on things. Terry looked around the table. What do you do with a love like that? So, I mean, a lot of raised eyebrows probably there, but I think like right out of the gate, there is a sort of interesting interpretation from Terry on a type of love, right? She was a bone-thin woman with a pretty face, dark eyes, and brown hair that hung down her back. She liked necklaces made of turquoise and long pendant earrings. My God, don't be silly. That's not love, and you know it, Mel said. I don't know what you'd call it, but I sure know what you wouldn't call it. Love. Say what you want to, but I know it was, Terry said. It may sound crazy to you, but it's true just the same. People are different, Mel. Sure, sometimes he may have acted crazy, okay, but he loved me. In his own way, maybe, but he loved me. There was love there, Mel. Don't say there wasn't. Mel let out his breath. He held his glass, turned to Laura and me. The man threatened to kill me, Mel said. He finished his drink and reached for the gin bottle. Terry's a romantic. Terry's of the kick me so I'll know you love me school. Terry, hon, don't look that way. Mel reached across the table and touched Terry's cheek with his fingers. He grinned at her. Now he wants to make up, Terry said. Make up, Mel said. What's there to make up? I know what I know, that's all. How did we get started on this subject anyway? Terry said. She raised her glass and drank from it. Mel always has love on his mind, she said. Don't you, honey? So, a not so subtle nod to a cardiologist always having love on his mind. It's not very subtle, is it? But it is a thing. I wouldn't just call Ed's behavior love. That's all I'm saying, honey, Mel said. What about you guys? Mel said to Laura and me. Does that sound like love to you? Well, I'm the wrong person to ask, I said. I didn't even know the man. I've only heard his name mentioned in passing. I wouldn't know. You'd have to know the particulars. But I think what you're saying is that love is an absolute. Mel said, the kind of love I'm talking about is, you don't try to kill people. Laura said, I don't know anything about Ed or anything about the situation, but who can judge anyone else's situation? I touched the back of Laura's hand. She gave me a quick smile. I picked up Laura's hand. It was warm, the nails polished, perfectly manicured. I encircled the broad wrist with my fingers, and I held her. When I left, he drank rat poison, Terry said. She clasped her arms with her hands. They took him now. Interesting point, right? You normally wouldn't put a break there like he does. And I guess you can't see this unless you're following along. Unless usually there'd be a passage of time or scene there, but they're just sitting at a table. So maybe some time has passed. And I think that's one of the things about this story that I like is like it's basically starts one way, although I don't remember it starting with that much of a bang, so to speak. My recollection is as they're drinking, they're becoming more and more open with their true thoughts about love. That's my recollection, which is almost immediately being disproven here as I read it. They took him to the hospital in Santa Fe. That's where we lived then, about 10 miles out. They saved his life, but his gums went crazy from it. I mean, they pulled away from his teeth. After that, his teeth stood out like fangs. My God, Terry said. She waited a minute, then let go of her arms and picked up her glass. What people won't do, Laura said. He's out of the action now, Mel said. He's dead. Mel handed me the saucer of limes. I took a section, squeezed it over my drink, stirred the ice cubes with my finger. Now, he definitely... Stirring ice cubes with fingers, that's in a ton of his stories. Twirling the ice cubes with her finger. Swirling the ice cubes with his finger. That is a phrase I've heard many times in his stories. I guess if you've got the alcohol in it, kind of kills the germs, I suppose. Well, I think that's one type of love, Pivy. I think that's one of the things that they get to in this story, but we'll see. It gets worse, Terry said. Oh, it gets worse. Like that's a great name for a video. In fact, I'm stealing that. I'm stealing it. It gets worse. It gets worse, Terry said. He shot himself in the mouth, but he bungled that too. Poor Ed, she said. Terry shook her head. Poor Ed nothing, Mel said. He was dangerous. Mel was 45 years old. He was tall and rangy with curly soft hair. His face and arms were brown from the tennis he played. When he was sober, his gestures, all his movements were precise, very careful. He did love me, though, Mel. Grant me that, Terry said. That's all I'm asking. He didn't love me the way you love me. I'm not saying that, but he loved me. You can grant me that, can't you? What do you mean he bungled it? I said. Laura leaned forward with her glass. She put her elbows on the table and held her glass in both hands. She glanced from Mel to Terry and waited with a look of bewilderment on her open face, as if amazed that such things happened to people you were friendly with. How'd he bungle it when he killed himself? I said. I'll tell you what happened, Mel said. He took this .22 pistol he'd bought to threaten Terry and me with. Oh, I'm serious. The man was always threatening. You should have seen the way we lived in those days, like fugitives. I even bought a gun myself. Can you believe it, a guy like me? But I did. I bought one for self-defense. I carried it in the glove compartment. Sometimes I'd have to leave the apartment in the middle of the night to go to the hospital, you know. Terry and I weren't married then. My first wife had the house, the kids, the dog, everything. And Terry and I were living in this apartment here. Sometimes, as I say, I'd get a call in the middle of the night. I'd have to go into the hospital at 2 or 3 in the morning. It'd be dark out there in the parking lot, and I'd break into a sweat before I could even get to my car. I never knew if he was going to come up out of the shrubbery from behind a car and start shooting. I mean, the man was crazy. He was capable of wiring a bomb, anything. He used to call my service at all hours and say he needed to talk to the doctor. And when I'd return the call, he'd say, "Son of a bitch, your days are numbered." Little things like that. It was scary, I'm telling you. Little things like threatening a person's life. It's a little, back then, that was a little thing. You could just threaten someone's life. Oh, hey, Anna. It's good to see you. Well, I'm definitely not going to call this any sort of literary analysis. I just want to kind of, maybe I read this and I get to the end of it, I'm like, oh no, it was crap. I don't know. We'll see. But Amy, I do appreciate, I don't know that I'd be reading this story if you hadn't copied me the link to the PDF. I appreciate it. All right, where was I? Okay, so this is getting annoying, going back and forth between this, I know. So I think that's sort of emphasizing a type of love, right? Romantic love, sort of, I'd die for you, I'd kill for you, I'd, kill or die for you, whatever. There's an idea around love, and it can stir that in people who are prone to that kind of thing. So I feel like that's valid. I still feel sorry for him, Terry said. Sounds like a nightmare, Laura said, but what exactly happened after he shot himself? Laura is a legal secretary. We'd met in a professional capacity. Before we knew it, it was a courtship. She's 35, 3 years younger than I am. In addition to being in love, we like each other and enjoy one another's company. She's easy to be with. Bam, like right there, talks about a different kind of love, right? Maybe the difference between liking and loving, right? Or making someone a cup of tea, etc. The daily acts of love. What happened, Laura said. Mel said he shot himself in the mouth in his room. Someone heard the shot and told the manager. They came in with the pass key, saw what happened, and called an ambulance. I happened to be there when they brought him in, alive, but past recall. The man lived for 3 days. His head swelled up to twice the size of a normal head. I'd never seen anything like it. I hope I never do again. Terry wanted to go in and sit with him when she found out about it. We had a fight over it. I didn't think she should see him like that. I didn't think she should see him, and I still don't. Who won the fight? Laura said. I was in the room when he died, Terry said. He never came up out of it, but I sat with him. He didn't have anyone else. He was dangerous, Mel said. If you call that love, you can have it. It was love. Let's try this. Break it up. this doesn't work as well, but let's see. It was love, Terry said. Sure, it's abnormal in most people's eyes, but he was willing to die for it. He did die for it. I'm just going to keep going. I sure as hell wouldn't call it love, Mel said. I mean, no one knows what he did it for. I've seen a lot of suicides, and I couldn't say anyone ever knew what they did it for. Like, to me, that's Mel being incredibly naive and sort of downplaying his current wife's ex's love and thoughts about love. And, the tragic, I think as Anna says here, right? Narcissistic. Oh, good night, Stacy. Thank you for coming by. I hope your ride home goes well. But I think Mel here is sort of showing his lack of broad understanding of the different types of love. Mel put his hands behind his neck and tilted his chair back. I'm not interested in that kind of love, he said. If that's love, you can have it. Terry said, we were afraid. Mel even made a will out and wrote to his brother in California, who used to be a Green Beret. Mel told him to look for it if something happened to him. Terry drank from her glass. She said, but Mel's right. We lived like fugitives. We were afraid. Mel was, weren't you, honey? I even called the police at one point, but they were no help. They said they couldn't do anything until Ed actually did something. Isn't that a laugh? Terry said. She poured the last of the gin into her glass and waggled the bottle. Mel got up from the table and went to the cupboard. He took down another bottle. Well, Nick and I know what love is, Laura said. For us, I mean, Laura said. She bumped my knee with her knee. You're supposed to say something now, Laura said, and turned her smile on me. For an answer, I took Laura's hand and raised it to my lips. I made a big production out of kissing her hand. Everyone was amused. We're lucky, I said. You guys, Terry said, stop that now. You're making me sick. You're still on the honeymoon, for God's sake. You're still gaga, for crying out loud. Just wait. How long have you been together now? How long has it been? A year? Longer than a year? Going on a year and a half, Laura said, flushed and smiling. Oh, now, Terry said, wait a while. She held her drink and gazed at Laura. I'm only kidding, Terry said. Mel opened the gin and went around the table with the bottle. Here, you guys, he said, let's have a toast. I want to propose a toast to love, to true love, Mel said. We touched glasses. To love, we said. So, bam, there you have Terry, who's just kind of condemning Laura's love with the narrator as naive because it is in the honeymoon period. So people are talking about love, dismissing love, but they all have their reasons, right? They all want their love to be the right love, the right kind of love. Outside in the backyard, one of the dogs began to bark. The leaves of the aspen that leaned past the window ticked against the glass. The afternoon sun was like a presence in this room, the spacious light of ease and generosity. We could have been anywhere, somewhere enchanted. We raised our glasses again and grinned at each other like children who had agreed upon something forbidden. I'll tell you what real love is, Mel said. I mean, I'll give you a good example, and then you can draw your own conclusions. He poured more gin into his glass. He added an ice cube and a sliver of lime. We waited and sipped our drinks. Laura and I touched knees again. I put a hand on her warm thigh and left it there. What do any of us really know about love? Mel said. Seems to me we're just beginners at love. We say we love each other, and we do. I don't doubt it. I love Terry, and Terry loves me, and you guys love each other. You know the kind of love I'm talking about. Physical love, that impulse that drives you to someone special, as well as love of the other person's being, his or her essence, as it were. Carnal love, and well, call it sentimental love, the day-to-day caring about the other person. But sometimes I have a hard time accounting for the fact that I must have loved my first wife too. But I did, I know I did. So I suppose I'm like Terry in that regard. Terry and Ed. He thought about it, and then he went on. There was a time when I thought I loved my first wife more than life itself, but now I hate her guts. I do. How do you explain that? What happened to that love? What happened to it? That's what I'd like to know. I wish someone could tell me. Then there's Ed. Okay, we're back to Ed. He loves Terry so much he tries to kill her and winds up killing himself. Mel stopped talking and swallowed from his glass. You guys have been together 18 months and you love each other. It shows all over you. You glow with it. But you both loved other people before you met each other. You've both been married before, just like us. And you probably loved other people before that too, even. Terry and I have been together 5 years, married for 4. And the terrible thing is, but the good thing too, the saving grace, you might say, is that if something happened to one of us, excuse me for saying this, but if something happened to one of us tomorrow, I think the other person would grieve for a while, but then the surviving party would go out and love again, have someone else soon enough. All of this love we're talking about, it would just be a memory, maybe not even a memory. Am I wrong? Am I way off base? Because I want you to set me straight if you think I'm wrong. I want to know. I don't know anything. I'm the first one to admit it. Mel, for God's sake, Terry said. She reached out and took hold of his wrist. Are you getting drunk, honey? Are you drunk? Honey, I'm just talking, Mel said, all right? I don't have to be drunk to say what I think. We're all just talking, right? Mel said. He fixed his eyes on her. Sweetie, I'm not criticizing, Terry said. She picked up her glass. I'm not on call today, Mel said. Let me remind you of that. I am not on call. Mel, we love you, Laura said. Mel looked at Laura. He looked at her as if he could not place her, as if she was not the woman she was. Love you too, Laura, Mel said. And you, Nick, love you too. You know something, Mel said? You guys are our pals, Mel said. He picked up his glass. Mel said, I was going to tell you something. I was going to prove a point. You see, this happened a few months ago, but it's still going on right now. And it ought to make us feel ashamed when we talk like we know what we're talking about when we talk about love. Come on now, Terry said. Don't talk like you're drunk if you're not drunk. Just shut up for once in your life, Mel said very quietly. Will you do me a favor and do that for a minute? So as I was saying, there's this old couple who had this car wreck out on the interstate. A kid hit them, and they were all torn to shit, and no one was giving them much chance to pull through. So, obviously, vino did flow, or gin in this case. We're seeing, first of all, we're seeing Mel almost kind of backtrack on what he was saying before about his, about Terry's relationship with Ed, almost seeming to be well, maybe that is the kind of love that matters, right? But, he's also snipping at Terry. Nope. So, yeah. As I was saying, there's this old couple who had a car wreck out on the interstate. A kid hit them. They were all torn to shit and no one was giving them much chance to pull through. Terry looked at us and then back at Mel. She seemed anxious, or maybe that's too strong a word. Mel was handing the bottle around the table. I was on call that night, Mel said. It was May, or maybe it was June. Terry and I had just sat down to dinner when the hospital called. There'd been this thing out on the interstate. Drunk kid, teenager, plowed his dad's pickup into the camper with this old couple in it. They were up in their mid-70s, that couple. The kid, 18, 19 something, he was DOA, taking the steering wheel through his sternum. The old couple, they were alive, you understand. Just barely. But they had everything. Multiple fractures, internal injuries, hemorrhaging, contusions, lacerations, the works. And each of them had themselves concussions. They were in a bad way, believe me, and of course their age was 2 strikes against them. I'd say she was worse off than he was. Ruptured spleen along with everything else. Both kneecaps broken. But they've been wearing their seatbelts, and God knows that's what saved them for the time being. Folks, this is an advertisement for the National Safety Council, Terry said. This is your spokesman, Dr. Melvin R. McGinnis, talking. Terry laughed. Mel, she said, sometimes you're just too much. But I love you, hon, she said. Honey, I love you, Mel said. He leaned across the table. Terry met him halfway. They kissed. Right, so there you go, like sort of a ritual that kind of comes into effect after you've been in a relationship long enough. If I keep hitting that wrong. Wait. Yes. Got confused there for a second. Terry's right, Mel said as he settled himself again. Get those seatbelts on, but seriously, they were in some shape, these oldsters. By the time I got down there, the kid was dead. He was off in the corner, laid out on a gurney. I took one look at the old couple and told the ER nurse to get me a neurologist and an orthopedic man and a couple of surgeons down there right away. He drank from his glass. I'll try to keep this short, he said. So we took the two of them up to the OR and worked like fuck on them most of the night. They had these incredible reserves, these two. You see that once in a while. So we did everything that could be done, and towards morning, we're giving them a 50-50 chance, maybe less than that for her, but here they are, still alive the next morning. So, okay, we moved them into the ICU, which is where they both kept plugging away at it for 2 weeks, hitting it better and better on all the scopes. So we transfer them out to their own room. Mel stopped talking. Here, he said, let's drink this cheapo gin the hell up. Then we're going to dinner, right? Terry and I know a new place. That's where we'll go, to this new place we know about. But we're not going until we finish. Not until we finish this cut-rate, lousy gin. Terry said, we haven't actually eaten there yet, but it looks good from the outside, you know? I like food, Mel said. If I had to do it all over again, I'd be a chef, you know? Right, Terry, Mel said. He laughed. He fingered the ice in his glass. There he goes. Always ice in the glass. I have a first edition. Oh, actually, I have a first edition of a P.G. Wodehouse book called The Ice. It's called The Ice in the Bedroom. Close, though. All right. That was a weird noise. Terry knows, he said. Terry can tell you. But let me say this. If I could come back again in a different life, a different time and all, you know what? I'd like to come back as a knight. You were pretty safe wearing all that armor. It was all right being a knight until gunpowder and muskets and pistols came along. Mel would like to ride a horse and carry a lance, Terry said. Carry a woman's scarf with you everywhere, Laura said. Or just a woman, Mel said. Shame on you, said Laura. Terry said, suppose you came back as a serf. The serfs didn't have it so good in those days, Terry said. The serfs never had it good, Mel said, but I guess even the knights were vessels to someone. Isn't that the way it worked? Or then everyone's always a vessel to someone. Isn't that right, Terry? But what I liked about knights, besides their ladies, was that they had that suit of armor, you know. They couldn't get hurt very easy. No cars in those days, you know. No drunk teenagers to tear into your ass. Vassals, Terry said. What? Mel said. Vassals, Terry said. They were called vassals, not vessels. Vassals, vessels, Mel said. What the fuck's the difference? You knew what I meant anyway. All right, Mel said. So I'm not educated. I learned my stuff. I'm a heart surgeon, sure, but I'm just a mechanic. I go in and I fuck around and I fix things. Shit, Mel said. Modesty doesn't become you, Terry said. He's just a humble sawbones, I said. But sometimes they suffocated in all that armor, Mel. They'd even have heart attacks if it got too hot and they were too tired and worn out. I read somewhere that they'd fall off their horses and not be able to get up because they were too tired to stand with all the armor on. They got trampled by their own horses sometimes. That's terrible, Mel said. That's a terrible thing, Nicky. I guess they'd just lay there and wait until someone came along and made a shish kebab out of them. Some other vessel, Terry said. That's right, Mel said. Some vassal would come along and spear the bastard in the name of love, or whatever the fuck it was they fought over in those days. Same things we fight over these days, Terry said. Laura said, nothing's changed. The color was still high in Laura's cheeks. Her eyes were bright. She brought the glass to her lips. Mel poured himself another drink. He looked at the label closely, as if studying a long row of numbers. Then he slowly put the bottle down on the table and slowly reached for the tonic water. That's something else that Carver does a lot. He uses repetition. So I think that's, I know that's intentional. His editor was Gordon Lesh. Very famous editor who was notorious for cutting down people's work to a nub of what it was. And Carver was like his pet project. He did a lot of stuff for Carver. He wasn't just his editor. He was his agent. There's a bunch of stuff for him. But this editor, Gordon, was known for being very, very particular about editing, right? And like not letting stories through unless the authors agreed to the edits that he would make. And because he was a fairly powerful person in publishing, especially in the short story milieu, a lot of authors would just kind of go along with that. And so there are those who say, if you see often you'll see a version of a story published in a magazine and then later it will come out in a collection. It'll be very different in the collection. And you can kind of see the footprints of Gordon Lesh in those. Well, apparently in Carver's case, it was an improvement, right? Cutting him down a bit, which he's pretty sparse. I can't imagine he was that much more. He was much more verbose without it, but the way it is, or the way it was. What about the old couple? Laura said. You didn't finish the story you started. Laura was having a hard time lighting her cigarette. Her matches kept going out. The sunshine inside the room was different now, changing, getting thinner. But the leaves outside the window were still shimmering, and I stared at the pattern they made on the panes and on the Formica counter. They weren't the same patterns, of course. What about the old couple? I said. Older but wiser, Terry said. Mel stared at her. Terry said, Go on with your story, hon. I was only kidding. What happened? Terry, sometimes, Mel said. Please, Mel, Terry said. Don't always be so serious, sweetie. Can't you take a joke? Where's the joke? Mel said. He held his glass and gazed steadily at his wife. What happened? Laura said. Mel fastened his eyes on Laura. He said, Laura, if I didn't have Terry, and if I didn't love her so much, and if Nick wasn't my best friend, I'd fall in love with you. I'd carry you off, honey, he said. Tell your story, Terry said. Then we'll go to that new place, okay? So obviously, drunk, belligerent, misogynistic, right? Very, I don't know if this is Carver's world. Okay, Mel said. Where was I? Okay, Mel said. Where was I? He said. Right, you don't need that. You don't need that second "well said." Like these, kind of like the dropping of kids before the thought and the deed. I feel like this stuff is all really deliberate. Whether it works for you or not, right, that's a totally different thing. Okay, Mel said. Where was I? He said. He stared at the table and he began again. I dropped in to see each of them every day, sometimes twice a day if I was doing other calls anyway. Casts, bandages, head to foot, the both of them. You've seen it in the movies. That's just the way they looked, just like in the movies. Little eye holes and nose holes and mouth holes. And she had to have her legs slung up on top of it. The husband was really depressed for the longest while. Even after he found out his wife was going to pull through, he was still very depressed. Not about the accident, though. I mean, the accident was one thing, but it wasn't everything. I'd get up to his mouth hole, and he'd say no, it wasn't the accident exactly, but it was because he couldn't see her through his eye holes. He said that was what was making him feel so bad. Can you imagine? I'm telling you, the man's heart was breaking because he couldn't turn his goddamn head and see his goddamn wife. Mel looked around the table and shook his head at what he was going to say. I mean, it was killing the old fart just because he couldn't look at the fucking woman. We all looked at Mel. Do you see what I'm saying? He said. Maybe we were a little drunk by then. I know it was hard keeping things in focus. The light was draining out of the room, going back through the window where it had come from. Yet nobody made a move to get up from the table to turn on the overhead light. Listen, Mel said. Let's finish this fucking gin. There's about enough left for one shooter all around. Then let's go eat. Let's go to the new place. He's depressed, Terry said. Mel, why don't you take a pill? Mel shook his head. I've taken everything there is. We all need a pill now and then, I said. Some people are born needing them, Terry said. She was using her finger to rub at something on the table, then she stopped rubbing. I think I want to call my kids, Mel said. Is that all right with everybody? I'll call my kids, he said. Terry said, what if Marjorie answers the phone? You guys, you've heard us on the subject of Marjorie. Honey, you know you don't want to talk to Marjorie. It'll make you feel even worse. I don't want to talk to Marjorie, Mel said, but I want to talk to my kids. There isn't a day goes by that Mel doesn't say he wishes she'd get married again, or else die, Terry said. For one thing, Terry said, she's bankrupting us. Mel says it's just to spite him and that she won't get married again. She has a boyfriend who lives with her and the kids, so Mel's supporting the boyfriend too. She's allergic to bees, Mel said. If I'm not praying she'll get married again, I'm praying she'll get herself stung to death by a swarm of fucking bees. Shame on you, Laura said. Bzzz, Mel said, turning his fingers into bees and buzzing them at Terry's throat. Then he let his hands drop all the way to his sides. She's vicious, Mel said. Sometimes I think I'll go up there dressed like a beekeeper. You know that hat that's like a helmet with the plate that comes down over your face? The big gloves, the padded coat. I'll knock on the door and let loose a hive of bees in the house. But first I'd make sure the kids were out, of course. He crossed one leg over the other. It seemed to take him a lot of time to do it. Then he put both feet on the floor and leaned forwards, elbows on the table, chin cupped in his hands. Maybe I won't call the kids after all. Maybe it isn't such a hot idea. Maybe we'll just go eat. How's that sound? Sounds fine to me, I said. Eat or not eat, or keep drinking. I could head right on out into the sunset. What does that mean, honey? Laura said. It means just what I said, I said. It means I could just keep going. That's all it means. I could eat something myself, Laura said. I don't think I've ever been so hungry in my life. Is there something to nibble on? I'll put out some cheese and crackers, Terry said. But Terry just sat there. She did not get up to get anything. Mel turned his glass over. He spilled it out on the table. Gin's gone, Mel said. Terry said, now what? I could hear my heart beating. I could hear everyone's heart. I could hear the human noise we sat there making, not one of us moving, not even when the room went dark. Bam! What we talk about when we talk about love, Raymond Carver. I don't know. I think, I think the ending's really powerful, right? I could hear the human noise we sat there making, not one of us moving, not even when the room went dark. So they were just sitting there in this room drinking. There's no lights in the room. They're just illuminated by the sun. The sun goes down. They're all drinking and ruminating and talking about love, right? Mel is even thinking about the love that he has for his ex, Marjorie, which is very akin to the love that Terry had for Ed. Kind of circles back around there, right? Mel was talking shit to Terry in the beginning about how that wasn't love. And yet by the end, in a way, in more than just a way, he sort of circled around to the same kind of idea of love for his ex-wife that she was for Ed. And I think like the narrator and Laura here, right, they're clearly the honeymoon kind of love. And in the critique of this, one of the things that they thought was interesting, and it made me wonder, it would have been neat to have a follow-up version of this story 10 years down the road. Another vignette of the same people, or possibly not exactly the same couples, but one person from each couple if they split up and moved on to other people, and their ideas about what they thought love was when they had this discussion and what they now think it is. So yeah, I mean, to me, that I don't know. I really like that story, even without the context of the rest of the book behind it. But I also think it's a pretty good litmus for if you'll like Carver or not. Well, it's probably one of his better stories, but I think if you like this story, there's a good number of Carver stories that you like. But if you don't like this one, you definitely won't like any of his others. A lot of his others are darker, and they are, like I said, they are kind of like the Carol O'Connor sort of 50s, 60s season 1 of WandaVision. I love Lucy kind of version of American life, which is pretty suffocating for wives. But there you go. Well, there you go, Pivy. And there's no reason for you to read any more Raymond Carver. I'll probably reread Will You Please Be Quiet, I think is one that I have not read in a bit. Anyway, that's pretty much all I had to talk about. There's this thing that's been going around. Fuck. Am I gonna play it? Is this it? No. Where is it? Because I want to ostracize myself from people as much as possible. Oh, this is hilarious. Like, Jordan Peterson keeps saying things that are dumber and dumber right on and I know he's saying it. I think he knows he's saying stupid things and he's doing it for engagement. I think. He can't really be that stupid. But like this?
Well, if it's the beautiful high-status women who begin that trend, the rest of the women will follow. Because trends always start in the aristocracy and trend downwards. Now, okay, so here's another thought.
What the fuck? I gotta play that one more time. First of all, like, such a fucking pretentious title, picture, everything about that. Super pretentious. You see his wake going out into the ocean. Terrible. Let's listen to it one more time.
Well, if it's the beautiful high-status women who begin that trend, the rest of the women will follow. Because trends always start in the aristocracy and trend downwards. Now,
can you imagine saying that? And thinking that that's true? Trends always start with the aristocracy and move downwards. That's almost exactly the opposite of how stuff happens, right? Like, yes, fucking in the late 1900s when President Hamilton was, President Benjamin Harrison was getting down with the blues and popularizing Southern blues and passing it down through the aristocracy for this cultural trend to catch on. If anything, it's the opposite. Like, maybe it goes both ways, right? And maybe in a democracy, maybe it's more inclined to go the other way, because if you're in a democracy, the working class is too busy working, generally, right? if you're in an aristocracy, people who have patrons and people who are the artists who have patrons, maybe they're the ones that get to make more of those calls. But just like, it seemed like such a, first of all, it's an absolute statement, right? Trends always start with the aristocracy and go downwards. Stupid thing to say. Totally wrong. Demonstrably wrong. I'm sure he's doing this just to kind of get people to engage, like to literally like say, no, you're wrong, right? Like he knows he's wrong. He's got to know he's wrong. He's got, like he tweeted a picture of, well, let me just share it, I guess. This is what I'm doing. Enjoy. Look, one of the things that is sort of, oh, it did send, okay. The fuck is this, man? This guy just took a shit and went to wash his hands, hopefully, or maybe he just saw this on the way out. Maybe he doesn't need to wash his hands. This picture assumes he was even using a public restroom. But let's assume he was using a public restroom and he took a shit and let's assume he washed his hands and he looked at this and he was like, this really pisses me off that they're asking me to be in any way conscientious, because this is not going to save the planet. Just like Greta is not going to save the planet. Did I say Greta? Thunberg. Is it? Oh my God, did I get her name wrong? I'm an idiot. Yeah, it's Greta. Anyway, for some reason I said the name Greta. I'm like, her name can't possibly be Greta. Nobody in the last century was named Greta. Unless you hear it like as one Greta Thunberg, unless you hear it together. It sounds a little bit weird when you just say Greta. But yeah, so he reuses this line, up yours, woke moralists, right, which really caught on last time, set the world afire. Tyranny is always petty, and petty tyranny will not save the planet. Okay, like first of all, there's something to be said for conditioning, right? And there's something to be said for repetition. Like in a way, like they say, it's the discipline and the habit is what gets you to where you need to go. It's not like if you eat really well one day or exercise a lot one day. Like you need to get in the habit of doing these beneficial things, and their cumulative effect will hopefully add a few years to the clock that is the countdown for when this life becomes uninhabitable by the disgusting creatures that we are. Okay. From my perspective, when I hear the name Greta, it sounds like an older person's name. That was my point. Anyway, he has this other thing, right? Oh, I'm glad that we agree there. Right? I mean, like, and I can totally see your point as well. I mean, the more I think about it, the more, like even when you said, like all of his stories, the protagonist is a lapsed or recently on the wagon alcoholic trying to find redemption or falling from redemption. And I'm like, well, no, there's this story. It's told from the point of view of a woman, right? But like those are the fact that I can actually call out the exceptions to that that paradigm probably speaks volumes in and of itself. I got another one. I mean, that's not it. Like this one's even worse. Even worse. Right here.
That a lot of what passed for morality was nothing but cowardice. You know, people are afraid to do something, afraid to be aggressive, afraid to be sexual, and they passed their fear off as morality. And prudes are sort of like that, is they don't want to have anything to do with sex, but it's not because they've made a moral decision or because they have strength.
Okay, so he's basing this off like one of his favorite people to quote, right? Nietzsche. The saying being, I've often found those who claim to be good, I've often laughed at those fools claiming to be good merely because they have no claws, right? Saying that, oh, if you're claiming you can do something or you're choosing not to do something in the name of piety, but it's really because you just don't have an option, then there's nothing good about it at all. And I certainly see the value of that statement, broadly speaking, right? But not here. But let's go on.
Character, it's just because they're afraid. And because that's true, it's easy to parody women who say no, or men for that matter, as prudes, you know, as old-fashioned conservative prudes who are just terrified of sex. And, you know, sometimes that is true.
That's another thing he does all the time, is he'll make a seemingly absolutist statement, and then he'll go, and well, you know, sometimes that is the case, but, and then he'll go make his sort of absurdist statement that is to the contrary. He does it again here in a second, where he's basically like, well, yes, sometimes that is the case, but, and then presents something as if it's, oh, are you saying his eyebrows? I don't know. I mean, there's a lot I hate about the guy, but his eyebrows? I don't know. I guess it's hard to know looking at this. Yeah, I hate his eyebrows, but I don't know if it's just because I hate him.
But you can be sophisticated as hell and say no. And I don't think there's anything more attractive to a man than a sophisticated woman who knows how to say no. Like that's top of the stack as far as men are concerned.
So he's speaking for men and basically saying like, okay, what he's saying here, the bottom line of what he's saying here is like, loose women are not attractive to men. Like the women who attract the high value males are the women who can keep their legs closed, right? Let's say nothing of what the men do, right? But the women have to keep their legs closed if they want to be attracted to high value males, according to him.
And they'll do everything to test the what would you call the thickness of that boundary. So I don't know how you tell that to young women. I don't even think men can, probably.
It's because the pill disrupts it all, right? Because the pill, it doesn't reduce to zero, but it does massively reduce the risks associated with sex.
I should say here, like the part of the premise of this conversation is that the birth control pill wasn't all good. Giving the control to the woman to control whether or not she wants to have a child when she has intercourse, maybe that wasn't a great idea, right? Maybe that was a step in the wrong direction, right? It gets worse.
Physical risks, not the psychological risks. And so with those physical risks removed, I mean, I have a fascinating quote from a woman who was in her 20s in the 1960s when the pill arrived. And she said that the advent of the pill meant that it suddenly became so much more difficult to say no to men, because what you used to be able to say was, no, we can't because I might get pregnant. With that no longer available, and what we're dealing with here, of course, is the agreeability gap.
It's also interesting that here he is about to interrupt her as if he has a point to make. And all he does is say exactly what she said. Which I'm not saying I agree with what she's saying, but it's interesting. He's like, well, no, yeah, I agree. And let's think about this. And then he basically just says the exact same thing she said.
between men and women. Women find it difficult to be assertive. And if they can't call on that kind of very clear risk as an appeal, then what are they left with? No, I just don't want to have sex with you. And that's a really painful thing to say, that it would hurt feelings. There's also, I think, an element of women being slightly physically frightened.
Right.
of
Well,
men
it boils
and
down
not
to
wanting
personal
to-
rejection then, eh?
Yeah, yeah. Which is a painful
Right,
thing to
because
deliver.
that's the only excuse you have left.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, here's something else that's worth pondering.
This is literally what she just said. And here's something else worth pondering. Just keep in mind, this is something worth pondering. What he's about to say is going to be really important. Ponder this, mortals.
You know, you talked about one of the advantages of the sexual revolution was the transformation of the idea that rape was a property crime, let's say, into a crime against the woman herself. And I would say, look, I have plenty of sympathy for that perspective.
Don't worry. He has sympathy for the perspective that rape is more than just a property crime. He sympathizes with that point of view. Okay? So, just in case you were concerned that he might not have any sympathy, if you'd like to consider rape, say, like just an injustice against another human being, as opposed to a crime against someone's property, don't worry, he's sympathetic to that.
And I think it's fundamentally true, but I'm going to push back because, you know, all this is all very complicated.
It's fucking not complicated, Jordan. It's not complicated. In this case, it is absolutely not complicated. Like, rape is a violation of a human's rights. Right? And this is what laws are for. Like, we don't need to be able to get like a mob of someone who was violaled's family or a brother, particularly violent father on their side. Like, that should not be the recourse. Or, you know, a husband, right? Because they're property of the husband.
You know, it isn't obvious to me that offers.
There is a lot that is not obvious to Jordan Peterson. He says that so much. The other thing he always does is he always appeals to his clinical practice, and he'll always be like, I've seen tons of people in my clinical practice, and luckily, right, like he has to, or does he have to abide by the Hippocratic Oath? I mean, he's not even an MD, but assuming he has to abide by some kind of confidentiality between therapist and patient, luckily, right, like every one of his clients seems to bolster the opinion he's happening to have at that particular moment. You know, man.
Women enough defense. You know, and so the counter argument might be, if untrammeled sexual access to a young woman is a crime, in order for that to be recognized as a crime properly,
in order for that to be recognized as a crime properly, there needs to be a law saying that is illegal to do it. That's what needs to happen. That's it, Jordan.
has to be viewed as something that will bring the males on her side to her defense in principle. Now, maybe not, right? Because you could.
And then he just covers all his bases by going, well, maybe not. Maybe everything I just said was bullshit. Maybe I have no idea what I'm talking about. But maybe I do. I don't know. You decide. I have to say words here. I'm getting paid by Ben Shapiro.
Well, maybe we could set up a society where merely, quote, transgressing the rights of a woman to say no is sufficient. But
like, first of all, so he put merely in quotes, like merely transgressing a woman's rights is sufficient, right? Or it would be a utopian society where something like that could happen, right? Oh, and I've seen this before. So he's about to say, but it's not obvious to me that that's the case. Like he's literally about to say, we could make it against the law, and maybe that'll work, but it's not obvious to me that that's going to work.
It's not obvious to me that that's sufficient. It's set up a society where merely, quote, transgressing the rights of a woman to say no is sufficient. But it's not obvious to me that that's sufficient. Like maybe sufficient means not only do you violate the integrity of the woman in a fundamental sense, but you enrage all of her male protectors. And
so, unless, I'm trying to follow the logic here, unless rape is so egregious an act to the community at large that a band of men come together, and I guess we're not talking about rape of men, by the way, here. This is only the rape of women, right? A band, unless it's enough to enrage a band of men to come to this person's defense, then we don't really have a mechanism by which we can control that. And because we want to keep women safe, and because we want to keep women safe, and we don't have the ability to stop men from raping them, the birth control pill is not a good idea. Because when we didn't have the birth control pill, a woman could turn down a sexual encounter with a man by saying, "Oh, I don't want to get pregnant." But if they no longer have that recourse and they have to say something like, "Well, no, I just don't want to have sex with you," right? One, they're more likely to get raped, and we don't have, as I've just pointed out, like we don't have any mechanism by which we can enforce or stop that. Why am I using this? I should be using this camera here. We don't have any mechanism by which we can enforce or stop that. So since we can't do that, it's a bad social experiment. It's a dangerous social experiment for women to have control over their own bodies in that way. That's where this sounds like it's heading to me.
then that's enough of a barrier, because God only knows how much barrier we need. And obviously, well, you just laid out a bunch.
No, see, God doesn't know. Laws are established. We've done it for a panoply of every crime on the planet, right? But this crime in particular, for some reason, God only knows how much punishment there needs to be, how much public outrage there needs to be behind it. Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, you do still have that option, but apparently it's not enough.
Of problems, especially now that the pill introduces, and we should stress that. The problem that women have in saying no once they're on the pill is that it's instantly personal. And that means the woman has to deliver a pretty hard blow. And that's especially problematic if she's...
Or not deliver a pretty hard blow. You know what I mean? This is exactly the point that came to my mind, Hannah. Right? Like, how could you apply this exact same reasoning towards slavery? Right? Like, if the only way for a crime to be illegal is for those who would perpetrate the crime to be outraged by that crime because the people involved in that crime would be their property, this is the perfect argument for slavery, or just treating people as property.
Somewhat potentially interested in the guy, right? How do I say no without hurting his feelings, alienating him, making him into an enemy, looking like a prude? And I mean, when you're 16, you don't know the answer to any of those questions. Like, you're not sophisticated enough to. And I saw this in my clinical practice all the time.
There he goes. Like, every time he's in an argument and he's talking about the way people behave, and he doesn't have anything to fall back on, he will bring up how often he saw this in his clinical practice. Because I don't know if you know this, but he spent 20 years as a clinical psychologist, which I'm not saying it has zero value, but thousands and thousands of psychologists, I mean, not even a psychiatrist, right? Thousands and thousands of psychologists, thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of therapists. Right? This doesn't give him any particularly unique insight into the human condition. But, he argues like it does, or he seems to think it does.
I had lots of women in my clinical practice who were abused serially. And, they were generally stunningly unsophisticated in their conduct. And I'm not trying to blame the victim.
He says while blaming the victim.
I'm just saying that sophisticated women, and those are often those they've had a lot of good relationships with men, brothers and fathers in particular.
So this is also all kind of coming back to the need to have a strong traditional nuclear family, right? Because that's the only way that you get both the protection that you need and the education that you need in order to be a sophisticated woman who knows how to properly turn down a man, because it's your responsibility. It goes the same way for men, right? Like, it's your responsibility as the person. If somebody wants sex with you and you don't want it, it's your responsibility to make that not happen. Like, the onus of stopping that is on you. It's not on them.
Sophisticated women signal to men who are getting a little pushy, in no uncertain terms, very early in the pushing game, that no is the answer, right? And they do that. If you do that really early on in the investigation, you don't have to use much force.
That's not true, right? So where he's going to with this, it's probably pretty clear, right? It's like, if you're a sophisticated woman, you won't get yourself into a situation where the lines of consent could be, as Robin Thicke would say, blurred. But if you're unsophisticated, you're going to find yourself in these situations where a man doesn't really have a choice. But, they got to do what they got to do. I mean, what do you expect? You expect people to be perfect?
But unsophisticated women, they can't do that at all. They don't know how. And then what happens is they run into an unsophisticated guy. He's too dumb to pick up any clues. And then by the time she really wants to say no, she's already on the bed.
Well, if he's too dumb to pick up any clues, then it wouldn't have mattered when those clues were delivered. Be consistent with your own arguments.
I'll give you an example of this. I had one client who was
And there he goes back to bringing a client out. No way to verify this is true. It's 100% not true, but let's hear it.
First, in her account, into a sexual encounter by a door-to-door salesman. Typical pornographic fantasy setup.
No chance. There's no chance that this is a real story. This is absolutely something he's made up. He probably made it up. He's making it up right now from the last time he was on Pornhub.
This young guy is going around door to door selling whatever he's selling. So he's not one of the world's high status males. Let's put it that way.
Oh, okay. So even in this, he has to use this sort of fake story to put down the working class, right? Not a high class male also.
And, and I suppose he's probably got all sorts of fantasies running through his pornography-addled brain. And so he comes to the door and she's in the house and she's a reasonably attractive young woman and he's friendly. And
I feel like he's pitching this. He's pitching this as a story idea.
Well, the first thing she does is invite him in. Now that's stupid. She's alone. She doesn't know who he is at all. And she invites him in. Well, he thinks, oh my God, what is she at? You know, maybe she really likes me. And you already said that men, and this is especially true if they're narcissistic and immature, radically overestimate the degree to which a woman's attention is signaling sexual availability for obvious reasons. And so he's thinking, oh my God, this is my big chance. And so then he starts to press her, and she has no tools at her disposal at all because she has no idea how to signal no. And let's say she's agreeable and neurotic with a bit of a history of abuse. And the next thing she knows, she finds herself on the couch, you know, 3/4 undressed. And
All right, that's about as far as I think I can go with this. It's disgusting. It's disgusting, and it's just like large. It's based in fallacies. The story he's using to back it up is just something he made up that can't be backed up with any sort of factual evidence because it doesn't exist. His ideas about consent are antiquated and deeply misogynistic, and I don't understand. I don't understand how he has so many fucking followers. I don't get it. And this is being piped in, and he's the rational, what is considered on the right, like the rational response to like Andrew Tate, right? Jesus wept, and I weep. And I hope you all have a good week, and I'll see you next time.